Director of the Innovation Management Research Center here in Bangkok, Thailand. And I really have a great opportunity today to have a wonderful chat with the CEO of MAQE. But before we do that, I want to invite everybody, if you want live interpretation, please go to the language button at the bottom and press either Chinese or Japanese. As well, for those that are participating, please submit any questions into the chat box at any time. We will have an open Q&A session about the 40th minute within our discussion today, so we'll open it up for the Q&A, but if you do have any questions, please put them in the chat room. So, Andres, can you please introduce yourself and a little bit about MAQE before we get started?
Sure. Thanks, William. And thank you for the invitation to be here. It's an honor. Bit short about the company. MAQE is a professional services firm based in Bangkok, Thailand. We actually have two offices, one in Hong Kong in Northeast Thailand as well. There's about 80 people, got started in 2012. And we are specialists in what we call personalized commerce, which means that we help big organizations sell stuff online. And we are also very interested in new and better ways of working, which is an explanation of what we're doing here today.
Wonderful, wonderful. So to kind of start this off, you know, every story sometimes has a beginning. So tell us a little bit about how you came to know Rendanheyi and why were you so interested in this model? Give us a little bit of that story. How did it begin?
Yeah, the top line view here. So as I mentioned, at MAQE, we've been experimenting with new ways of doing things for a long time. And you know, you name the philosophy, framework, operating system, we've probably looked at it and touched it, right? But for me personally, the first interactions with Rendanheyi came about a year and a half, 2 years ago. And I probably through online channels, I have a group of people that I go to for advice on these kind of things, and hires started popping up more and more, and started following interviews with the company and with corporate rebels and the boundaryless community, etc. And slowly but surely started feeling that this is something that is very much aligned with everything that we are trying to do, especially because it comes from Asia. And again, we are in Southeast Asia. And so that connection was a bit too much of a good thing to pass on. And we started our Rendanheyi implementation in the beginning of this year.
Fantastic. So what we're going to do now is we're going to have kind of a structured dialogue, but it's still going to be free flow. And everybody, just to recognize what we've done is we put together probably some of the more provocative keywords, if you would, of Rendanheyi. And I will be asking then Andres about his perspectives and his opinions about these keywords as it relates to his company. And so one of the first keywords, and this would actually be words plural, but it's the concept of people first, which we see in the notion of Ren. And so, Andres, you know, knowing that people first are embedded in the word Rendanheyi, how does having people first as the core focus of Rendanheyi help your business versus putting the boss first or putting profits first? Give us your sense about how you see human value first.
Right. So a couple of thoughts here. For the longest time, MAQE has had this driving force behind everything that we do. We say that happy people do good work. And so we have for the longest time had a keen focus on what we call personal fulfillment. And that sort of explains the backdrop to us going after or going with Rendanheyi. But a couple of things that I have learned personally along the line here, and that I think might be instructive. Because I think the notion of people first might be misinterpreted in either of two ways. The first one being that it's just about treating people well, right? Which, I mean, you should treat people well, you should pay people well, you should treat them as adults, but I don't think we shouldn't need a principle to tell us to do those things, right? What we're talking about here is something much more fundamental. And the second part is that we're not just talking about the employees themselves, right? We're talking about their relationship with external stakeholder, with customers as well, because we realize that there's an interdependent nature of all these things, right? And this is actually a factor behind fulfillment as well. Fulfillment impacts learning and relationships. So it's much deeper than just treating people well. It's about shifting priorities from profit and control to people and leaderless organizations. And once you start thinking around in those circles, then there's a lot of realignment that needs to happen down the line. So it's very, very fundamental.
So let me ask you this as a follow-up question. So you're the boss, you're the CEO, and you're trying to now convey this kind of concept that the people come first. What has happened to you personally? Have you had a shifting of your own sense of identity or your own personal transformation in this as part of this trying to convey this people first thing? What's happened to you as the leader?
I don't know when this particular thing, what came first, Rendanheyi or the fulfillment part. But I'll share one thing, and this is very practical from our story, right? The first time I sat down with someone I work with and I asked them, "Are you fulfilled working here?" That changed the game, because all of a sudden you're not just talking about creating profit or shareholder value together. We're actually talking about something much more fundamental, something that is deeply personal for the person sitting at the other side of the table. And what we're saying is that we want the company to help you get to where you want to go, assuming that there's an alignment between where the company is going and you want to go. Then we should try to align that, right? But the fact of the fact that we can have those conversations is fantastic, and hopefully I have become a much better person, coworker as a result as well, because I have a much better understanding for what the people around me want and what makes them tick, right?
Yeah, I can imagine just by asking those empowering questions that you're truly, sincerely probing for, that just the nature of their answer changes you, because it really is establishing much closer relationship that you have with the people that are essentially in your tribe or your community. So I imagine your lines of questions really enable you to really go deeper and really show that it is about the people. It is not about the other externalities you can get worried about in business, right?
True. No, we can't forget the externalities as well. We have to find a balance between the two. But absolutely, the conversations are fantastic, and as a very practical starting point for people, I really encourage you to ask the question, are you fulfilled? Because it's the answers you get will surprise you, in both good and bad. But it will give you the starting point for change.
Yeah, I love it. I've got that one written down for my toolkit. So thank you for that. So let's go to the next keyword here, which is zero distance. This is pretty much, if you would, a global term now. Harvard business reviews have been written about this. Books are being written about this. And yet there's still a lot that goes with this term. When you first heard this, what do you think it meant? And what is your understanding now of this as you are trying to implement or practice this? Can give me a sense of that.
Yeah. So this is another thing that I think is easily misconstrued, because I think I got it wrong initially. And let me start this way. So MAQE is a design-driven organization in the sense that we were early adopters of design thinking and lean agile, appreciative inquiry, etc. Tools and methods that have empathy and co-creation. The search for unmet customer needs sort of built into them, right? And coming at it from that mindset, it's like zero distance makes a lot of sense. Now, of course, I need zero distance, because otherwise, how can I empathize with my customer? How can I identify unmet needs and co-create solutions if I'm not in physical proximity to the customer? But I think that's where I got it wrong, because it's not just about proximity in the physical sense. I'm sure we can dig into it in a bit, but this notion of alignment and incentives. In Rendanheyi, we want to make sure that people, the remuneration is connected to the value that they create for customers, right? Now we're talking zero distance, right? It's not just about me standing in front of you and talking to you. It's about our incentives being aligned, and me getting a part of the value that we create together, right? So again, it's a much more substantial part of the conversation than I maybe first realized.
So you mentioned tools like design thinking, really, which is, if you know that practice, it's human-centered design. How has that been transformed when the concept of zero distance is actually, embraces or encompasses tools like that we see in the design world? How do you see that?
I don't know if I would say that our use of design thinking has changed per se, but one thing that springs to mind that is different is that as part of this, let's call it transformation, where zero distance and human centricity isn't so much a practice as it is a mindset, right? And as part of that story, we have now tried to make sure that every single team within MAQE tracks and continuously improves some measure of customer satisfaction, whether or not they operate towards an external customer or an internal customer. And that's the internal nature that is new for us. So just a day or so ago, I was talking to one team that had used design thinking as the method to map out our recruitment and hiring process to find gaps in there. And they were co-creating solutions to those gaps with the people that we have recently brought on. And so the tool itself is the same, but now we're actually using it internally for our own processes in a way that we haven't done before, because we have this mindset now saying that actually we're here to serve, we're here to create value, and that's not just for external customers; it's actually for internal customers and coworkers as well.
Good. So people always ask this question. And I know this might be a little bit of a stretch, but you mentioned, the customer satisfaction index, which has been around forever and so forth. But how do you, or how would you measure zero distance in your business? How would you measure that?
Well, okay, so this is going to sound like a bit of a cop-out, I think. But maybe because it's early days for us, right? What we have been talking about internally is the fact that until today we simply don't ask this question. On the one hand, we actually have had a tool to do NPS scores, and we have a digital tool that we poll customers, etc., etc. And there's pros and cons with that whole system, right? But for some reason we haven't actually asked the question internally, like the recruitment function. Are they providing value for the team? Because at MAQE, for example, every team hires for themselves, but there's a centralized recruitment function that supports them, right? But we haven't necessarily asked the question whether this support is worthwhile. Maybe the teams would rather go outside and get that service from someone else, right? And so for right now, it's simply asking the question is, am I providing value? And I guess regardless of what the score is, what can I do to improve? Because again, it's about helping others and serving others and providing value.
How am I providing value? I love it. Again, it's kind of a qualitative question, but it's not a yes or no. It requires a response, a thoughtful response on allowing your team to emerge, right? Self-awareness, self-emerging on how am I achieving zero distance? I find that, again, a profound question to go after. Let's switch now for a moment and let's go to the next keyword, which is about microenterprises, and specifically autonomous microenterprise teams. Hire has 4,000 plus of these microenterprises that are operating autonomously. MAQE is in the process of creating MEs, if I understand it. Can you share with us basically how is that going? Where are you in the process? And more importantly, what were some of the reactions you got when you went to your staff, which I think you call the makers, which I love, the makers, right? What, how did they respond, and how's it going?
Yeah. First, I remember the first time I read the fact that there were 4,500 micro enterprises that was, working autonomously, and everything was generally going swimmingly well with profit targets being hit and achieved every year. So, which initially is gaping like how. I still don't know the complete answer to that question, but I think I have a better idea. And it's interesting. This question of how do we remain agile as we scale. I think, and this is just my interpretation, I think Hire's answer to that was like, well, you just keep things small. Bureaucracy will set in as we scale, as the organization grows. So let's just not grow beyond 10, 15, 20 people, right? It's just brilliantly simple. And it makes absolute sense. So we're doing this in a couple of different ways. It started with the implementation of something that we call MOS, or the MAQE operating system, which is heavily inspired by holocracy, which we can talk about in a bit if you want. But that goes about unbundling the organization in one way, but specifically for micro enterprises, MAQE is one whole. And what we're trying to do now is to create a venture building program with which to incubate specific service offerings and bring them to market. So what we're trying to do essentially is to turn employees into entrepreneurs, into using a 4-step incubation process with specific stage gates that are all determined by customer response and customer value being created, right? And if the micro enterprise is successful and graduates from stage 4, we will spin that off as a separate entity and hand equity over to the ME owner, which means that they will have the 3 rights to decide on business strategy and resource allocation and compensation. And so we're currently working on that program, but we have 3 micro enterprises in the works currently. And in terms of the response, I think it kind of depends on where in the organization you asked. It was about of the 80 people, about 8 or 10 who jumped at the opportunity initially and said, okay, I want to do this, which I guess is normal, early adopters. And for everyone else, I think they're interested, but they want to see it in action before it happens, which makes perfect sense. And so we need to define it out. We need to show some quick wins and bring more people into the fold.
Yeah, I would imagine that some people, as you're saying, if it's a normal distribution curve, right, you're going to have 20%, let's go. There's going to be 60 in the middle. They're waiting to make sure it looks good. And there's 20%, they're going to go, no way. We're going to die doing this because it's so radically different, especially as in the Thai context where the types of organizations are much more geared towards the positions of title and respect and so forth that comes out of more of a bureaucratic organization. When you look at your venture building program, what I'm curious about, there's this concept for leaders that if they want to embrace autonomy, they have to begin to psychologically accept this idea of letting go of control. And I'm asking you, how are you looking at letting go of control as you're looking like at your venture building process? Is it staged? Is it all at once? Or how are you thinking about that in terms of allowing for this autonomy to become rich and powerful?
Well, I get two things. On the one hand, this notion of letting go of control is a continuous thing that we've been doing for a long time. So we've for years had units within MAQE that has taken control of specific functions and particular aspects of the company, so that my co-founder and I can sort of let go and bring people along for the ride. So that's one part. for the venture building, it's actually a very practical discussion to be had as well, because as long as the ME is still part of the financial structure of MAQE, I have responsibilities that I have to keep, right? So while we hand over the running of the ME early on, it's not until they graduate from stage 4 that they are truly independent in that sense, and they can do basically whatever they want. MAQE will still have a stake in that new enterprise, depending on the amount of investment that we've done in the running up to incorporation. But it is a process where that part of the responsibility sort of grows over time with those 4 stages.
Sure. It sounds like you're allowing the evolution of it to occur. And since they've never practiced it before, where people don't know how to deal with all that freedom and responsibility and accountability, in fact, right, of their budgets and what they're doing, it seems that letting go of control seems measured to allow for the full thing to be explored. And as others see it happening, I think there's to be a lot of lessons learned that the teams around those micro enterprises are going to start to kind of benefit from.
I hope so, and I think so.
Good.
Definitely. Yeah.
All right, let's move on to the next keyword, ecological systems. This is a biggie. Mm-hmm. This is kind of, this has been emerging now in many angles. There's many interpretations of this, but very exciting in terms of the use of both ecological systems, business ecosystem models, etc. Since we see this starting to be embraced by businesses, and the idea of partners and co-sharing, etc. How are you planning to develop your ecological systems? How are you going to go about doing that?
Again, I think there's 2 parts. The micro enterprises will serve as one part, and that is maybe a little bit more midterm. Immediately right now, the focus is actually to build an ecosystem internally, if you will. And the foundation for that is this thing that we call MOS. To make a long story short, I'm going to use a software analogy since we are a software company, but I think it's instructive all the same for everyone. In software, we have over the past decade transitioned from what we call a monolithic design pattern to a microservices design pattern. Basically, we instead of building products and services as a monolithic whole, we build them as distributed systems. And the idea here being that while the monolithic architecture might be relatively easy to build, it's so full of interdependencies that if one part fails, everything comes tumbling down. And so we've learned in the last decade or so that the microservice architecture might be a better answer to that question of remaining resilient as we scale. And so what we're trying to do is apply that the same design pattern to the organization, and this starts with unbundling the monolithic whole into a couple of 100 job roles that we have identified. And this is a process that any company that is going through sociocracy or holocracy will go through. But for those of you who might not have done that before, it is a lot of work. But it's very instructive. Just imagine looking at your own job description if you have one, and trying to distill from that any number of individual job roles that are maybe part-time or smaller. And you'll soon realize that a lot of those job roles you don't like. They don't cater to your strength. And there might be other people in the organization who are better equipped to do them. And so instead of having a hierarchy where I sit in one place and then the hierarchy will tell you who reports to me, this type of new value network, or what we want to call this new structure, consists of job roles, and you will find one person fulfilling multiple job roles. And the ecosystem part in all this comes in from the fact that in the structure that we have right now, there is ample opportunity for people to move between platforms and teams within MAQE, which means that we have an opportunity to break down silos and move information and ideas around more freely than we had before. which is great for the fulfillment aspect that we mentioned on top too, because learning is a good thing. And so now I have a system where a developer can join the HR team because they need something they need some technical help for some reason, and so he gets exposed to an area of the business where maybe he hasn't been exposed to before, and then he brings that back into the engineering team. And so there's a lot more movement in here, and it's a starting point at least for the whole journey.
Yeah, and I'm reminded of the fact that I think what you're doing is framing the opportunity that in order to build a business ecosystem strategy that appears in the market or appears, quote unquote, outside of your organization, if you haven't done the organizational innovation to allow yourself to move in that direction, starting an ecosystem on the outside is going to be very difficult if you're trying to build it with a strong hierarchical functional silo. And it sounds like with your MOS, and being in the software business, you're going to use your own technology to enable your own capacity to be agile, if that's what I'm hearing. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, it starts internally. It starts with us, right? In the startup world, we talk about product market fit and problem solution fit. What we're talking about here is organization market fit, organization customer fit, right? We have to have an organization that is resilient and agile enough to handle the variability in the environment around us. And if we want to create an ecological system with MEs that, a boundaryless organization that collaborates with other companies, well, we need to start internally, right? And familiarize yourself with the concept of win-win and customer centricity and all of those things. So it starts here.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Let's go to the next keyword about innovation at scale. This is probably one of my most favorite. We all know that to achieve any kind of innovation, we have to experiment, all right? And at higher, when the user pain points are actually realized and the MEs start searching for this experience scenario through, experimentation and iteration. They do this with internal partners, external partners, and they're really doing experimentation at scale, especially when you hear 4,000 enterprises, right? This is a very critical piece of organizational culture or process or whatever. And I'd like to know, what is your perspective on this? How are you carrying out experiments? And more importantly, how are you dealing with failures and that moment when the prototype didn't work and all of a sudden the team does what? How does that look like in your company?
Right. Well, first and foremost, let me humbly point out that saying that innovation at scale may or may not apply to MAQE. With 80 people as opposed to hires 80,000, right? But even so, there's definitely things that we need to look at, and innovation is such a big area generally, but innovation is about delivering value, right? And so again, if I borrow go back a little bit, and we talked about asking the question, am I providing value? You can use that as the starting point for experimentation. And I asked you today, William, am I providing value? And you say, well, on a scale from 1 to 5, it's like 5. Okay. I'll try to do better, and I'll put some initiatives in place, and then I'll ask you again in 3 months, and then I'll ask you again in 3 months, and I'll ask you again in 3 months. And so it is, fundamentally that the change that a lot of organization needs to go through, I think, is going from this mindset of predict and act, where you do big bets and slow feedback, to a culture of sense and respond, where you work with small bets and fast feedback. Because if you fail, it doesn't matter as much, right? If your first experiment is a $10 million enterprise, and you're going to be very careful. Whereas if it's me asking you, am I providing value, it's easier. Not to maybe go into too much detail here, but I think I know you and I have shared the interest in an ISO standard called ISO 56002, which has to do with innovation management systems, and it's a lot to talk about in there. But again, from experimentation, so I have a team internally who's looking at those 24 capabilities that you find in that framework. They ran a survey, identified internally what the shortcomings were, and then they pinpoint prioritize what they need to work on, put a few initiatives in place, and then they measure their results, and then they do that on a continuous basis every quarter. So if you start like that, perhaps hopefully, I don't know, if you start like that and you don't badger people for failing, because we fail a lot when it comes to these things, especially initially. Everyone put way too high expectations on what they thought they could achieve, and so over the years now we've learned to sort of, actually it takes a lot of time to achieve actual outcomes, not just doing tasks, but actually getting results. It takes a lot of time, and it forces you to think about, how am I going to measure this, which is a bit of a new thing for a lot of people.
Yeah, and one thing you said I really can appreciate. I think in a certain way, some companies take, we're going to react to failure, as opposed to what I heard you say, in a certain way, you're getting a proactive. You're actually asking questions ahead of the curve about, how are you doing? How are you creating value? In other words, the learning is built in all the time. And it's not like you're waiting for a failure for the team to actually have feedback and go in and go, okay, what went wrong here? And I think that proactive questioning, just like we started with, is a pretty powerful way to kind of maybe reframe this, because if not, it ends up being, we failed. And as you know, in Thailand, there's a lot of issues that come around the culture with saving face, and you don't want to disappoint your boss, let alone the company. So I think by allowing for that proactive questioning that you're doing, I think might actually open up a whole new door to allow them to feel safe and have that psychological safety that it's okay to proceed. Do you see that the same way or no?
Yeah, and another part of it is so we have all these teams. They run all these experiments internally, both for customers as well as internally, and we all come together at least once per month, and we present our work to each other. And I do the same thing. I fail way more than I should, and I'm still here because I do achieve some things as well. But it just goes to show that, like, no one's above failure, right? And as long as you learn something from it, then that's okay.
Yeah.
I actually one thing more. So I speak about talk about it a lot with different organizations, and one of the things I realized was that when you start talking about the experimentation, there's this sense that it has to be this massive, statistically significant, quantitative study, otherwise it's not an experiment. I'm like, no. Asking someone how they feel is kind of an experiment too. It's a fussy experiment, sure, but if you're learning something from it, it's okay, and you start small and you go from there.
Yeah, and I remember in my days at Stanford teaching about design thinking that, the concept is that we are all actually prototypes, and the next day is another prototype, and there's another day yet that I can be better, I can improve, etc. And it gets into the notion that life is really lifelong learning, right? And when I have full accountability for my learning and my decisions in my micro enterprise, it becomes exciting. It becomes almost, there's a joy that comes out of being able to experiment and be able to move, because I am in fact a prototype myself. And when I can have that mindset, experimentation is the next level of my growth. So I can embrace it, right? As part of that personal transformation and being open to be more of an entrepreneur. So yeah, it's fantastic. Let's now go to my favorite, which is win-win value-added statements. And this is a hard one in certain respects, but it's kind of easy at certain levels. But let's play with this for a moment. For an ecosystem to really prevail and to continue to expand, and really looking at a lifetime journey with your customers, every party in the ecosystem has got to be able to realize value. In other words, everyone must be winners, because if you're going to sustain that constant growth and iteration and experimentation, how do you see this happening in MAQE? how do you frame this concept of the win-win orientation?
Okay. Yeah, this is a big one. So two thoughts, and I'll try to bring it together. The first one is, as we said initially, if we put people first, by definition, we're replacing something else, right? So usually we will profit first or shareholder value first. And so it kind of makes sense that we need another way to measure success. If it's not pure financial, and the WWVA is the fourth financial statement. It just so happens that it also includes non-financial parts of it, right? And so it addresses that issue initially. And on the ecosystem part, initially when I first started reading about Hire and 4,500 micro enterprises, and I'm like, how on earth does this function, right? Because in my mind, being software, was it a micro enterprise? I need an API. Well, this is the API. This is the application for the programming interface that you need to make sure that incentives are aligned. Right? But for MAQE early days, barely scratched the surface here, to be honest. We use agile contracts with customers, which is a little bit, if transactional commerce is over here, we're really here, but there's a lot more for relational contracting to go here, and then we have the WWVA at the far end, and I know I need to get there. I know I need to create one of those for my own business, because I think context is important. I'm sure the WWVA, so rolls off the tongue, doesn't it? Is that the Hire can provide a template, but I'm sure that I will need my own interpretation of that, and so it's a thing that I'm looking to do in combination with some of my more long-term customers, because it's all about win-win, right? And so we need to do this together, but I haven't gotten there yet.
Yeah, and I would imagine as you begin to mature your ecosystem beyond the boundaries of your company into a larger ecosystem in the marketplace, I am willing to bet that when you approach your partners and say, we are all about co-share and co-create and winning and sharing that value, I think you will find a natural attraction will begin to occur for people that really want to play in that way. And the ones that won't. They will stay, quote unquote, in a competitive mindset. But I'm suggesting that the world is shifting, and that there's going to be a philosophical underpinning that if we're not all sustainable, none of us is sustainable. And I think we're learning this lesson in a certain way, which I won't get into, but we can see things occurring when it's a win-lose situation. So a very powerful concept, in my opinion, about Rendanheyi. And we're going to the last question before we go into open Q&A. We're going to talk about lifelong users. It's kind of really again a mystical statement, but yet it does mean things, and it is important when we talk about sustainability. And you can see the definition up here on the screen. So one of Hire's goals is to transform, what they call one-time product transactions with a customer into lifetime users through kind of understanding their experience and being involved with the value that they're looking for in their daily life, et cetera, like through the smart home microenterprise. In your opinion, which concepts in Rendanheyi are the key to creating the concept or the actual realization of lifetime users?
Probably the notion of scenario thinking, but let me contextualize that a little bit. Hire and MAQE are very different companies, right? Not just in terms of scale, but Hire started off as a product company, now they're product/experience. I am a professional services firm, or I represent a professional services firm, and in a sense, I provide service experiences, right? And so the scenario thinking, the experience mapping, the journey mapping is the thing that sort of brings this together, right? But exactly what happens along the journey would be quite different. This is something that actually also came kind of natural, I think, and going back to design thinking and all those things. We have rather early on, maybe we got started in 2012. By 2015, we had a service model that we called digital evolution. And to be, I'm recreating things in my head right now. But what happened in 2015 was that we took a look at all the requests that we've gotten from customers over the past couple of years, and we could rather quickly see a pattern emerged, and we could see that the questions that we got, they fell along the product lifecycle, because our customers are either in the process of, oh, I have a problem, I don't know what to do, or I have an idea and I don't know how to bring it to life, or I have something but I want to scale it, etc. Right? And so what we realized is that we could actually create service offering for each of these particular use cases, and it's a scenario, right? Because if you're helping someone build a digital business, they will start here and they will go here. And I don't know if it's a lifetime customer per se, but this process can take years. And lo and behold, actually, I have a number of my customers that I've been working with since 2012. They're very, at this point, we have a structural relationship. And again, going back to win-win and all these things, it's that idea of notion of scenario thinking is very powerful, because I can now in a better way anticipate the needs that a particular customer will have a year ahead of time, right? And so I can prepare.
Yeah, and if you apply that to the zero distance concept, right? It's not like we have zero distance one time, we design a service. That zero distance is continuous. It's the mindset that of a continual relationship. So I'm not disconnected, if you want, from the day-to-day elements. And with IoT and sensor technology and information management, you can almost begin to see how close you can become with the customer and pick up the needs that emerge based on the new technologies that might come out, et cetera. So I find that the combination, right, of some of these principles start to really begin, they feel holistic in terms of the capacity of creating a lifetime journey. Easier said than done, but I think as Bill Fisher used to teach that, it used to be when you're going to buy a refrigerator, they map the fact that decision usually happened about once every 15 years, because refrigerators are made pretty good, and that the time frame to actually influence that decision came down to about a 45-minute window every 15 years. Now, can you imagine the marketing cost, the sales, the development, in order to be right there, the convergence of the brand to help make that decision every 15 years in that 45-minute window, as opposed to I am constantly evolving with that customer. I have daily, if not hourly, interactions with what's going on. And so back to the orientation is, what is that scenario that you can create with your services that allows that constant interaction so I never lose touch? And I'm not worried about, are they going to be around at the 45-minute window 15 years from now? So again, the evolution of IoT and technology and data, and I think all of this is starting to enable a much more powerful orientation to this lifetime journey. All right, I want to at least allow a little bit of time here for Q&A from the audience, and I've been picking out a couple. There's a lot of great conversation going back, Andreas, and you should probably, if you have a chance to see some of the comments, the folks are really bringing some additional insight here. Yeah. But there is one. There's a couple comments. Yep, if you can do innovation at scale, psychological safety is a prerequisite. Without that, it's just, it will destroy itself very quickly. Because, and we've seen this, especially in the Asian cultures, where you fail once, and depending on how people are treated or how they feel, that gets around. And you won't have any hackathon, you won't have any open source, because they will literally run and hide, because this idea of I'm losing face, and without the psychological safety, it's extremely problematic.
And actually, one more thing. So I remember reading I think Gary Pissarro wrote an article a few years ago about innovation culture, and it was particularly talking about like the good and the niceties and the not so niceties of innovation, and said you need, psychological safety is a prerequisite. Absolutely, I agree. But you also need to have the counterpart, the candor part, right? Because you need to be free to speak your mind, but you also, as well as being, feeling that you can do so with it in relative safety. So you need both parts of the equilibrium, so to speak.
Yeah, and that's part of what the feedback, right? That's again part of how do you get the feedback? How do you ask those questions proactively so that you can keep people engaged with you and not feeling that it's a mistake or something? And John says cycle is speak up culture. Exactly to your point, right? That feedback loop is. Go ahead.
Sure. Like you need to be able to speak up, and I need to be able to hear you. Sure. Yeah. So speak up and listen.
Yeah. So here's a out of the box question. What's the role for a hyper masculine ego in this model? Hyper, you can take what you want out of it, but hyper masculine I think gives you the sense of this. How could they work in Rendanheyi?
That's a difficult one. So okay. So I can, it's a doozy. I can only speak for myself in my own context. And again, like the Rendanheyi thing for us is very early on. So maybe this is not indicative of Rendanheyi as well. But I'll give you an example. We don't have departments at MAQE. We these things are distributed. We've taken the head of department role and broken it into 4 or 5 different roles, and one of them is coaching. So we call them squads. So there's a coaching squads, and initially when someone comes in and says, okay, well, who's in my squad and who should I take care of, kind of thing. It's like no, actually no one is assigned to your squad. If you behave a certain way, they will come and seek you out, but they can leave at any time. Right, so it's an opt-in as opposed to being assigned, right? And so if you are an egotistical maniac, then probably you're going to have you're going to be sitting alone in a room a lot, and it's going to show very quickly, and you probably don't want that. So at least I hope for MAQE it wouldn't work.
Yeah, and I would imagine if you really do have a Rendanheyi culture, that in most cases people will use what I call the law of 2 feet and simply walk away if in fact there's no demonstration of what the common principles are. And I think this is why it needs a little bit of coaching and that for leaders who really need to understand that, right, in order to enable a system like this. There's one comment up here that's very interesting. It said, on zero distance, I would suggest Dana Zohar's work, rather than incentives being aligned, and as David Bowman is talking about the separation being an illusion, we are entangled, not aligned. So in quantum context, this is about quantum entanglement. What's your sense of this? This is a little bit metaphysical, but I think there's a point here. It's alignment of incentives versus an understanding that we are truly entangled in a world where there is no separation between us, our partners, our customers, whatever. It's maybe the word is coherence, but what's your sense about alignment of incentives? What's your take on that?
My first reaction was like, this is something that Otti would write. And, hello, Otti. Very good. Wow. So I'm not, this is not an area that I'm an expert in, but this notion of the interdependence and entanglement, I think is part and parcel of Taoism that underlines Rendanheyi, right? I'm not it's above my pay grade to speak about a little bit, but I'm pretty sure there's a foundation in Rendanheyi that talks about these things, the yin yang kind of entanglement part. But yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah, and to get into a deeper kind of orientation about that, if you just are, right? And I just recognize everything that is, and I'm in the state of exploration every moment. I am the prototype, right? Things emerge. And it's not about my alignment with the incentives, but it's almost of my alignment with myself to be conscious and comprehend that which is coming and emerging with me, with you, with others and people that we're with. You know, imagine a world if we could be that sensitive and have that level of empathy. We would talk about lifelong communities, right? That could emerge out of this. Another comment here.
Actually,
yeah.
So can you just very quickly, just because the reason I know Art is because he did give a presentation at the TL Around the World a few months ago about ethics and talked about virtue ethic, which is I think is around it. It was excellent. So if anyone listening want to check that out, TL Around the World on ethics, very good.
Yeah, I heard that too. I totally agree. So from a standpoint of if there's any more questions, people, please send them in here. I see a lot of comments in that. Let me look at a couple things here. There's a lot of talk about culture, right? That's a big word, right? And Rendanheyi, in a certain way, has a culture. How do you look at culture? How do you think about it? What enables it? What do you do to develop culture as you're thinking about your journey moving forward?
So what I'm going to say next makes me a bit unpopular in some areas, but I think that's a misinterpretation of what I'm saying. So let me try to formalize this. So I think culture is very important, but I think culture is a byproduct of the structures and systems that you have in place. And so if you want to enact organizational change, I mean, this should be obvious, but I can't go to you, William, and say, hey, William, next year, can you be a little more creative? Because we need some innovation coming. It's not going to change, right? Rather, I need to start with structure. I need to start with systems and let those systems take its toll, so to speak. And it will, the bigger organization, the longer time this will take. But actually, this reminds me. So one of the first things that I read from the chairman Chang Raomin was, he described his role as CEO of Hire as being a designer of incentives, and it just made a lot of sense to me. It's a very simple statement, but it says a lot, and I think it aligns pretty well with this notion of culture being. I mean, what is culture? Culture is behavior, right? And if you want to change that, it needs to start somewhere. We can't directly influence it, and so we have to find other means. So in and I'm going to hypothesize here because this is obviously early days for me, but if you have a ecosystem of micro enterprises, presumably those micro enterprises can have their own rather unique culture. As long as they are interconnected via the same API and they have incentives aligned, we should be okay. But I guess I might have things to learn in that department, right? But I do think culture, structure, process, that part.
Yeah, agreed. I used to teach for years at Stanford University that culture is a byproduct of how you engineer systems and structure, because you can put in systems and structures that are completely antithetical to the quote unquote values that you have, and you don't know about it until it's almost too late or all the problems start to come up and you see the incoherence begin to occur in the organization of its inability to execute what it really wants to go after.
Yep.
There's a comment, did anyone in your company have difficulty in letting go of power, and how did they transition or not?
A few people have left since the beginning of the year. It's always difficult for me to say if Rendanheyi was the reason. I mean, the life happens and people come and go. But no, I don't think so. And I mean, the reason I feel pretty confident saying that is because we were already sort of deep into the self-management aspect of the whole thing. So that part is not necessarily new. The micro enterprises does take it to the next level, because all of a sudden there's P&L responsibility, and you can set your own salary, right? I don't like, as long as you bring in the money, then it's your, you keep it, right? So that's new. And those who are, I do have people who have run companies before, and they were more likely to be willing to engage in this journey, and which is actually, let's not take that for granted, because as I mentioned, we're actually building this program currently, and so what these guys are doing is they've started building their micro enterprises in the knowledge that the exact equity stake that they will have post incubation stage 4 is not fully determined yet, and they're doing it anyway, right? Which is pretty awesome. Yeah.
Great. So we're getting close to the top of the hour, and there's one big question that I want to make sure we get in here that had come in. Can you provide some practical insights of the applications of other forward-thinking practices like holocracy? Have you used them in your journey, and how would you compare them, like with Rendanheyi?
Right. Yes, I have. Not just holocracy, but other things too. Although I do have an affinity for holocracy, being a software person. MAQE is not a holocratic organization, though. So I just make that clear. But there's aspects of holocracy found within MAQE, and it has been within MAQE for years. Right? Do they align, coincide? Yes, I think they do. In the sense that again, opinions might diverge here a little bit, but for me at least, Rendanheyi is more about philosophy. It gives you some principles, but it leaves the implementation up to you and your context. Holocracy is a little bit different. Holocracy is very prescriptive, and it tells you exactly what to do. And there's pros and cons with both of those, right? On the Rendanheyi part, freedom is fantastic, and it's why I like that part. I wholly agree with the principles. It's focused on customer value and all those things. But I do appreciate the freedom to do the implementation part as I see fit together with my team. But it also makes it very difficult to implement too, right? Because you have to figure it out yourself. And so that part is easier with holocracy. But then again, holocracy is very restrictive to some, and that might be jarring in another way, right? So there's the balance, and I think every organization and every person is different. You would gravitate to one to the other, but I think they can cooperate and co-align, coexist, I should say.
Excellent. Thank you, Andres. So as we come to kind of a close for a moment, can you just give us a couple final words about MAQE and your orientation and experimentation going on with Rendanheyi as the final words?
Okay. It's a pleasure to be among friends. The journey that MAQE has been on for the past 10 years has been, I would say, lonely, but all the stuff that we've been doing internally for the past 10 years has been an internal endeavor. And ever now since getting into Rendanheyi, started talking to people in the community, it's been eye-opening, and I've gotten so much good feedback, and people reaching out with help and advice, and I really appreciate that. So that's another part of Rendanheyi that we maybe haven't talked about yet, but there's a group here of really smart people, and that's just top, the icing on the cake, so to speak. So very happy to be here, and I hope that what I was sharing today was of value to someone. And if you want to know more, feel free to reach out. You can find me on the interwebs.
Great. And we do have one question, and I'll send it to you. Hopefully we can follow up with Claire. She asked a very good question about what skills are you grooming for the people in the venture program. But because we're at the top of the hour, we're trying to stay on time. Claire, we'll try to get that response to you offline, but thank you for that. And Andres, we at the IMRC are looking forward to all the journey and the living and the great things that will come along the way in the coming years. So thank you for being a great example of demonstrating Rendanheyi in small, medium enterprises. It will soon be, hopefully, an ecological
Hopefully.
system with
Yeah.
power. So thank you
Yeah.
so much.
Thank
And
you.
with that, everybody, we're going to call the conclusion to today on time. So from Bangkok, Thailand, as we say, Swati Kap and Kap Kun Kap. Thank you, everybody.
ดีนะครับ